Good morning everyone, EagleX from ATX EagleX Gaming here today, and I have a meta breakdown video. If you guys didn't see, I had a meta prediction video of me trying to understand what's going to show up in the upcoming meta game for the final EX4 regional and NA at the DFW area. We're going to go ahead and talk about the results and what happened in these tournaments. But if you have not already liked, comment, or subscribed to the channel, I'd really appreciate it as it lets me know I'm going in the right direction for the type of content you guys enjoy. But moving over to the original posts, I worked with another judge, Jeff Milley. Jeff, he is an amazing guy. He and I worked together on getting this data together. I went through and basically sourced, tagged, and labeled all the data. And there's some pretty important things I kind of want to point out, and Jeff did the actual procurement of the matchup data and did the data scraping itself, so we can kind of get a good idea of what's going on in our EX4 format, and the really cool thing that shaped up that no one really saw coming. So first things first, Jeff linked everything in a few social media posts, so if you want to see this stuff more in detail, I'll link it down in the description below of the video. But looking at the overview graphics, it's important to know this data came from the Carta Magica Regional and the DFW Regional, IRL in Texas. And we're going to see there's game matchup, we're going to have game wins and matchup wins in some of these graphics. So starting over here with our first graphic of the game data with the most popular decks. You can see how much a deck was represented in the left column and its win rate. So if we have this higher resolution image here, I'm not highlighting the image. And why is it highlighting? Boop, there we go. We can take a look at this graphic and see Blue Flare was the most represented deck in the two regionals collectively, similar to Greymon Pile and Hunters being right behind it, but Blue Flare took a massive lead compared to the other decks. But really interestingly is you can see the win rate across the board. There is nothing that is overwhelmingly seems like it needs to get hit. It seems unfair. Of course, popularity will be one factor of how much someone enjoys a format, but from the most represented decks of Blue Flare, Greymon Pile, Hunters, Red Hybrid, Beelzemon, Machine, Bloom, and even Secon, it's a pretty healthy spread across the board. There's nothing super dark green or super red per se, as each deck is kept in check with another. And something that I don't think I explained super well, Greymon Pile, it's how I call Greymon Toolbox decks. When I went through these deck list data, if there was more than 3 or more level 6 Greymons, I called it a pile because it wasn't just the fact they tried answering everything, but there are so many of them that had unique techs. I even saw the blocker reboot Greymon from 1.5, the secret I believe it is. Not a great card necessarily, but it was teched into someone's build. But then you also saw builds that used BT1 War Greymon. You saw builds that used Raid War Greymon with the Virus Greymons, and then the Virus Greymons in their own build. And they just kind of all get aggregated together because they play very toolboxy, very piley. Like, you have a similar build overall. But it's very different when I emphasize like the Raid War Greymon matchups. So if we go over to, not this here, little Barbie movie, but if we go to our next image here, when we look at this game data from the players in the top 20%. So these are builds that players are doing really well with. So 400 people, 10% is 40. So the top 80 players give take of the regional. And this is how they're performing with these decks. And this really shows that Hunters has a lot higher of a skill cap deck, especially Red Hybrid. The top tables can do really well given the hands of a good player. And then it shows Greymon Pile's kind of in a balanced area where it is at pure equilibrium with the format. But talking about the Greymon Piles versus Raid War Grey. Raid War Grey answers the deck so well because you will basically remove every stack with no issue, always be larger, always be a better blocker than the Virus Greymons or the Text Greymon decks can answer. So always having that consistency, but then you suffer other matchups really poorly, like Red Hybrid becomes almost unwinnable if you're focusing on pure War, Raid, or Grey. You can also just take a general glance though, but this is all game data for each game played in a set. So now if we move on to our next graphic here of the overall EX4 game data, And pardon, this is a very large image. You can see overall that the big deck that really came out didn't have a lot of representation like I figured it would. It's probably from the time crunch of it becoming popular and people getting a chance to practice it. Millith or Mill decks had a really strong win rate overall. The only bad matchup really being Blue Flare due to the amount of pressure it can give and recursion of their pieces. And Cross Art, but it's just because they're both like super aggro decks that punish the deck. It's kind of similar with D-Brigade. I think that was actually, if we look over here, we can look at D-Brigade in like one of these categories. And like it has a really good Millith win rate. You just smack them before they can do anything. But that's like the whole idea, is Millith doesn't do well against decks that are very hyper aggressive on the board. And that have sticky bodies on top of that. But we see that. And other decks that I think were notable, Shine Greymon, this is before BT13, keep in mind, so it's not doing super hot, it doesn't have a lot of the payoff and aggression that really adds on to the deck. But we're going to definitely see that change here in the upcoming format. And then the very last thing I want to talk about from an overall perspective is Security Control. Has a horrible Blue Flare matchup due to the amount of recursion and value the deck can provide. But it healthily checked some of the more popular decks like Greymon Pile, like Hunters, Red Hybrid. It's not the fact that you can negate options and that's the game. There is the tax builds, there's the stall builds, there's so many variants of Setcon that it can answer the most relevant decks in each format given the right timing and how developed the format is. But I think everything else is kind of expected. Machine was the one deck I wasn't expecting to do as well as it did, but it was a great meta call for everyone who did bring it, as it does answer Blue Flare, the most popular deck, super well. So congrats to everyone who brought that and saw that ahead of time. It was something I definitely overlooked. And then moving on to our very last graphic of match data. Match data is different than game data, but this emphasizes who actually wins the set every time. And I'm getting these double clicks again. Ugh. Okay. Anyways, it's gonna be blue. But if you look at this and you see the match data emphasizes who wins the set itself. So like you can see Blue Flare basically wins every set against Shine Greymon. It didn't have that many losses to Shine as it went through the tournament run. But if we look over here at Blue Flare versus Machine Greymon, we can see that it doesn't win the set that often. It's pretty hard. It comes to Machine kind of bricking, not getting analog mans, or Blue Flare just out aggroing the matchup. But with that being said, guys, if you enjoy this content, let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. Take care.